The first person we recognize today is the model of a passionate citizen activist. In recognizing Ruth Chickering Clusen, we recognize someone who was willing and able to seize the tools of citizen participation in order to make a difference in the environment. To start this morning, we've asked Mrs. Clusen's daughter, Catherine Clusen, to say a few words about her mother.
Good morning. I'm pleased to be here this morning at the occasion of the induction of my mother, Ruth Chickering Clusen, into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. I represent all of our family in thanking the organization for this honor to her. I've been asked to present a brief profile of some of the more personal aspects to her accomplishments. Pioneer is the word that first comes to mind when we think of our mother. It was highly unconventional in the 1950s and 60s, when mothers stayed at home and tended to their children and husbands, that our mother was taking on the paper mills in Green Bay to clean up the Fox River. This in a city where thousands earn their living at these same paper mills, and most thought that she should be at home minding her own business and concentrating on her children and taking care of her husband. We always said that some mothers bake cookies, but our mother cooked up plans for change, studying influence and making a difference in the world. When she was a member of the State League of Women Voters Board of Directors and later president, many times we came home in the afternoon from school to a living room filled with women, two of which are here today, by the way, I'm pleased to say, from all across the state who had gathered for a monthly board meeting. These women were discussing serious business, and often it had an environmental bent to it. One Saturday in the 1960s, I rode along with her here at Stevens Point for a League of Women Voters Water Pollution Forum, where the guest was Hugh Downs, the former Today Show host. I remember her being incensed that in his new role as the Procter & Gamble spokesman, he thought he could charm this assembled group of women into believing that the detergent foam billowing in Wisconsin's waterways was nothing to worry about. But we all know then that he had obviously underestimated and had no experience with the League of Women Voters. When her travel world had to expand beyond the range of her trusty 1959 Oldsmobile, she became one of Austin Straubel Field and Green Bay's best customers. In the early days, you may all remember North Central was the only airline serving Green Bay, and most often the planes were DC-3s. The ticket taker was the baggage loader, and sometimes even the pilot on a bad day. Efficiently getting in and out of Green Bay throughout her career was a struggle, but it was always important for her to get home when she could to be with us. When she could, she also brought us along, and in 1971, my 15-year-old sister traveled with her to an environmental conference in Stockholm, Sweden. Representing the League of Women Voters so ably, she also spent those jet-lagged, sleepless hours playing gin rummy for Kroner with her daughter and trying to find American food for her. Later travel throughout the world was sometimes lonely, including one particular trip for 6 weeks to the Far East, Malaysia and Indonesia, for the State Department, where she was discussing and training environmental and women's issues. After coping with Western women's business clothing and the Oriental toilet facilities, I always recall her relief at the end of the trip to be in Korea on an American Army base on the 4th of July, having a hot dog and beer with the American soldiers. From her early days on North Central, she graduated to all manner of military aircraft while at the Department of Energy. I know she prided herself in never showing her fear and or discomfort when touring a site in the wilderness from an open helicopter, dipping and diving so that the generals could give her a good look at what was down below. While doing all of this, she has always been the master of organization. She was instrumental as president of the National League of Women Voters in sponsoring the 1976 presidential debates. When the schedule had finally been laboriously negotiated, to her dismay, the first one was to be in Philadelphia less than 48 hours before her daughter's wedding. And predictably, both events were handled seamlessly. I know today she'd also want me to thank her husband of over 56 years, Donald, for all his support in her endeavors. He kept the porch light on and always encouraged her to take the many opportunities that came her way. We're all proud of you, Mom, and thank you for letting us share in all your accomplishments. You've taken us places we'd never have gone alone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we'd like to invite a longtime colleague of Mrs. Clusen's in the trenches in the League of Women Voters. Ms. Carol Toussaint, I'd like to have you come and reflect on your interaction and memories.
I think Ruth is a little worried that I won't be quite as generous and kind, forgiving, but she has nothing to worry about. It has been my pleasure to have made many of those steps with Ruth. And I do know when Catherine speaks about the airplanes that I did quite a few of those Ruth's white knuckle flights to Washington. So knowing how she did not like getting on that airplane always made me even more admiring of her willingness to do it, to go anywhere. Well, in May of 1962, when Ruth was elected president of the Wisconsin League, she became responsible for a host of positions in the League. The rest of you who don't belong to this organization, forgive me, I'm going to use a little of the jargon. The League had paid attention to a lot of things and had reached positions, as we call them, and they were kept on as current and continuing responsibilities. Well, one of them, I was reminded as I looked back to do a little research, one of them in 1962 was this: support for a water policy that reflects the fact that water is a single resource and that the same rules of justice apply to ground and surface water, and that any system of mandatory permits includes the water-rich areas of the state. Now, that was 1962, but all of those decisions had been made in the mid-50s. There weren't many organizations, especially organizations of women who were broadly concerned with issues that had focused so directly on our land and water resources. And then, in her final year as president, one of the featured speakers at the convention was the very person she would replace on the national board. And this woman had come to Wisconsin for the League convention, and she spoke about her work representing the League of Women Voters before congressional committees or with groups concerned with water resource planning and control. And so there was Ruth transitioning from a state organization with care and concern that went back many years to an organization actively involved in the same issues at the national level. So just to bring this full circle, I read with great interest the most recent issue of Forward, the State League's publication. And it said that the League of Women Voters of Greater Green Bay Environmental Committee is working to develop a new environmental coalition. And the current president of the state organization is from Green Bay. So 40 years, and there you are, the continuity of concern really makes a difference. Now, I'm going to hope that all of you, if you haven't read it, will read what has been printed about Ruth, because a lot of the details of her work with the League of Women Voters are included there. But I did something kind of sneaky, Ruth. I called the national office to talk to a staff member who'd had the privilege of working with you all the years that you were on the national board. I talked with Lloyd Leonard, whom you may remember worked with you on a lot of the congressional testimony. And I said, okay, Lloyd, I have this few minutes to talk to people, and I want them to go away from here aware of the difference that Ruth made on congressional legislation. So give me a few for instances. And he said, as I wrote vigorously, well, in 1974, there was the Safe Drinking Water Act. We needed the League on that. And then he proceeded to talk about estuary management, solid waste disposal, eutrophication of lakes, sedimentation from suburban construction, wetland preservation, land use, air quality standards and implementation. And just when I thought he was through, he said, oh, I forgot all the things that Ruth was involved in on auto emission standards. So I think that's a pretty impressive list, and I was happy to be able to share it with you. What a number of people have said is that the League was an essential organization at a really critical time in our nation's history. And Ruth has been heard to say, well, that's true, but the thing that made the League different is it was always in it for the long haul. It was not the organization that was, sort of the flavor of the month. It was, this is something we know about, we care deeply about it, and we are there in the long haul. A friend of mine, not too long ago, recommended a book to me, and I bet there are others in this audience who've been influenced by the same book. And I think you'll see in a minute why I bring it into these particular remarks. The book is called Organizing Genius, and the authors, Warren Bennis and Patricia Ward Biederman, began with what they say is an interest in all of the extraordinary collaborations, the process by which great groups are able to accomplish so much more than talented individuals working alone. And the authors chose to chronicle such groups as different as the Manhattan Project and a political campaign to make their point, none of us is as smart as all of us. Well, I think they could just as well have taken the League of Women Voters as one of their examples, because we can tell a story or two about how some of those great groups came together. And anyone in this organization, whether it's through the League or through your own specific conservation group to which you've given your time and attention, knows that what you have to have are individuals who see things differently, who spot the gaps in what is known about something, who see the connections and want to do the next thing, not keep doing the last thing. That's what sets them apart. And I'll give you a quick story from this book. I'm going to quote directly just in case anyone is wondering if I'm plagiarizing here, okay? This is a direct quote. Given our continuing obsession with solitary genius, it's no surprise that we tend to underestimate just how much creative work is accomplished by groups. Today, an important scientific paper may represent the best thinking and patient lab work of hundreds of people. Collaboration takes place also in the arts. A classic example is Michelangelo's masterpiece, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. In our mind's eye, we see Michelangelo looking, I suspect, a lot like Charlton Heston in our mind's eye, laboring alone on that scaffolding, high above the chapel floor. In fact, it is recorded that 12 people helped Michelangelo paint this work. He was not only the artist, he was the head of a good-sized entrepreneurial enterprise that collaboratively made the art that bore his name. Well, I've known Ruth, and I've gone a lot of those steps with her, and I know that she is always quick to cite the help and support she has gotten from other people. Perhaps quite true, but someone has to have the inspiration and the insight, work on the design and the direction that will bring others into the work. And someone does have to be on the scaffolding. So thanks, Ruth, for getting up there on the ceiling and painting a picture of which we are all very proud.
Thank you. Thank you both. Now, both you and Chaplain, please come up here. And Kevin, if you will come to do the honors as well. When we induct an individual into the Hall of Fame, we have made for the Hall a plaque which contains a picture of the person inducted and historical comment from them. In addition to that, we're fortunate in that the legislature every year prepares a testimonial for each of the inductees. So this morning, I'm going to ask Kevin to read, since he's here, I'm going to ask him to get to work and to read the testimonial. And our two other speakers, I'll ask you to help me unveil the plaque as soon as Kevin finishes.
Ruth, the entire legislature has appreciated your contributions. This is on behalf of all of us. It's a citation from the legislature of the state of Wisconsin that says as follows. Whereas Ruth Chickering Clusen's distinguished career in conservation began with her involvement in the League of Women Voters, where she rose to the position of president of the State League in 1962. And whereas she was named chairperson for the League of Women Voters National Committee on Water Resources in 1966, and chairperson of the League's National Committee on Environmental Programs and Projects from 68 to 70. And whereas Ruth participated in the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment and as an international environmental consultant. And whereas she was nominated as Assistant Secretary of Energy for the Environment in the Department of Energy in 1978. And whereas her comment, quote, "We speak dry words at times, but if one has eyes to see and the mind to perceive that what we are working for is the quality of our environment in this and the next generation, one cannot but feel a quickening of the senses." End quote. It is a beautiful inspiration to many. Now, therefore be it resolved that the members of the Wisconsin legislature, on the motion of Senator Shabilsky, Representative Lassa, Representative Marianne Lippert, commend Ruth Chickering Clusen for her accomplishments and for being inducted into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. Congratulations, Ruth, on your extraordinary achievements.